I had almost given up hope that I would ever become a mother. My marriage to James wasn't exactly a disaster, but it was far from the warm and loving partnership I once dreamed about. We didn't fight much, but the distance between us was growing like an unwelcome guest who just wouldn't leave. Both of us were anxious, filled with silent worries, but neither could find the words to blame the other. We were too polite, too reserved for that, or maybe just too scared. Doctors kept telling us everything looked fine. Sometimes life just doesn't align the way you want, they said. Rare, but it happens. I tried to believe them, but deep down, I felt like I was carrying a weight that no scan or blood test could measure. Then one day, at the office in the sleepy town of Alton, I felt dizzy, like the room was spinning with no invitation. My vision blurred, and my head pounded with a relentless throb. My manager, a brisk woman named Claire, noticed immediately and told me to go home, not to come back until I felt better. So I left, barely holding myself upright, and collapsed onto the living room sofa the moment I got through the door. Lying still was the only relief from the nausea swirling in my stomach. My mind raced trying to figure out if I'd eaten something dodgy, but everything was normal. My lunch was just a bland turkey sandwich and a handful of grapes. Nothing suspicious. James came home hours later, his brow furrowed as he found me pale and motionless. His face went from concern to alarm in seconds. He said I looked like I'd seen a ghost, or worse, turned an unnatural shade of green. I tried to brush it off, saying I probably just ate something that didn't agree with me. But he didn't buy it. He insisted we go to the hospital immediately. I knew arguing was pointless. He was already grabbing his coat. 2 hours of waiting, endless forms, and impatient stares later, we were called into a small consultation room. The doctor, an older man with a faintly smug smile, greeted us like he held a secret he was enjoying too much. I was tired, hungry, and honestly a little irritated. How could he be so cheerful at a time like this? Then he said it. Congratulations. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. James blinked, puzzled. With what? He asked cautiously. You're pregnant, the doctor replied, though the pregnancy is still very early. James sank into the chair beside me, stunned, while I stared back at the doctor, a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope swirling inside. But the hope was short-lived. Not long after, the pain started, sharp, relentless contractions that took my breath away. I was mentally prepared for this moment, but physically, I was no match for the searing ache that gripped me. James was by my side, one hand on the wheel as he drove us to the hospital, the other holding mine tightly, grounding me. I begged him silently to hurry. When we arrived, the hospital bureaucracy tested my patience and James's temper. Paperwork that could have waited was being filled out while I struggled to stay conscious. The nurses were indifferent, the clock ticking louder than ever in my ears. Suddenly, the door to the emergency ward swung open, and a familiar face appeared, Rachel. She was an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but who'd once shared the same neighborhood with James and me. Rachel was warm, oddly reassuring, and despite the chaos, I felt a flicker of comfort. She promised everything would be okay, even though I was terrified. The possibility of a cesarean was mentioned, and I nodded numbly, feeling like a passenger on a ride I hadn't signed up for. The journey to the operating room was a blur, faces, voices, cold air. Rachel walked beside me, making small talk that I barely registered. She shared snippets of her life. Twice married, twice bruised, now free like a bird with wings clipped but still soaring in spirit. I envied her resilience. When I woke, I was trapped in a fog. My body felt heavy, bound by invisible chains. I heard voices around me, sensing James's presence nearby, his eyes glistening with tears. I tried to ask about our baby, but my voice failed me. A man in a white coat checked my vitals, his expressions a mixture of concern and routine. Then I slipped into silence again. 2 days later, I was transferred to a hospital room, but no one spoke about the baby. When James finally came in, I sat up, desperate for answers. He sat down without meeting my eyes and told me, in the coldest way possible, that our daughter had died, a tragic mistake by the doctors. My world collapsed. I felt like screaming, breaking, disappearing. That I told James the first couldn't do this anymore. I blamed no one but knew our marriage was finished. A week later he moved out, leaving me the apartment as a silent farewell. I felt like a ghost wandering through my own life, surrounded by memories that stabbed like knives. I couldn't stay there. Couldn't face the happy families, the laughter of children echoing in the streets. I sold the flat to a nice couple and took a train to a remote village in the Lake District, where the silence was deep and the air crisp with pine and earth. Here I became someone else, a forest ranger of all things. It sounded odd for someone with my background in graphic design, but the woods offered me something the city never could. Peace. The villagers were curious but kept their distance after my initial coldness. I was an outsider. A woman who didn't gossip about potato harvests or complain about the weather. I was the keeper of the forest, watching over the trees, the animals, even scaring off a few poachers who underestimated me. My little cottage was my fortress, filled with books, plants, and the soft hum of solitude. Spring came, painting the woods with vibrant greens and delicate blooms. I found joy in watching the forest awaken, feeling the pulse of life beneath the soil. I even started a vegetable garden, carrots, beans, wildflowers, and young apple trees. A far cry from city life, but it was mine. Despite everything, James and I kept in touch, birthday wishes, occasional calls. Each time my heart cracked a little more, but I never showed it. I told myself it was better this way. One evening, as I was tending my garden, the phone rang. It was James. His voice was hesitant, almost shy. He told me Rachel had been asking for my address. I was startled. Why would she want to find me after all this time? James said he hadn't meant to give it, but somehow had. We talked for a while, swapping stories about our lives. I told him about my garden, the forest, the peace I'd found. He seemed almost envious, joking that I sounded like I'd become a proper country bumpkin. I resisted the urge to invite him over later that night. Just as I was about to sleep, I heard a faint knock at the gate. There was a dog, large and silent, looking lost. I opened the gate cautiously. Behind it stood a little girl, tears streaming down her face, trembling like a leaf. She told me a woman had brought her here, said to walk straight and she'd reach the village, but she'd gotten lost. Her story was strange. She claimed her guardian was someone named Rachel. My breath caught. This girl was called Lily. She spoke of a harsh grandmother who never wanted her, and a woman, Rachel, who sometimes brought food but never affection. The girl's eyes were too old for her years, filled with stories I wasn't ready to hear. I gave her something to eat and tried to make her comfortable. My mind reeled, connecting dots I wasn't sure I wanted to see. I called James with trembling hands, begging him to come. This was beyond anything I could handle alone. When he arrived, the truth crashed down like a wave. Lily was our daughter, the child we'd lost, the one stolen from us. Rachel had been playing a dangerous game, trying to insert herself into our lives, manipulating pain and loss for her own twisted reasons. The world as I knew it shattered again. But this time I wasn't alone. Together, James and I faced the mystery and the darkness that followed. We were ready to fight for our family, for our daughter, and for the fragile hope that had somehow survived. Yet, deep inside me, a shadow lingered. An unanswered question whispered in the rustling leaves, a secret waiting to unravel that would change everything once more. Life in the village had always been quiet, almost painfully so, but now it felt as if the silence was charged with something ominous, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The arrival of Lily, our daughter, had upended everything I thought I understood about loss, betrayal, and hope. She was a small girl with wide, wary eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 questions she wasn't ready to ask, and a fragile trust that I knew would take years to build. Yet there was an undeniable spark in her, something raw and untamed, like the wild woods surrounding our home. I remember the first morning after she arrived, how the sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting golden stripes across her tousled hair. I sat beside her, carefully brushing the strands away from her face, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise up in me. She was wearing a faded pink dress, too thin for the chill lingering in the air, and mismatched socks that made me smile despite the heaviness pressing on my chest. I found an old cardigan of mine to wrap around her shoulders, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in my gut. James was quieter than I expected. Seeing Lily stirred something deep in him, a mixture of guilt, wonder, and a trembling hope. He stayed in the background, careful not to overwhelm her, but the way he looked at her when she wasn't watching said everything. I caught him once tracing the curve of her cheek with a tentative finger, as if afraid she might vanish like a dream if he touched her too firmly. Days passed and the routine of our new life began to take shape. I taught Lily the names of the plants in my garden, showed her how to coax carrots from the soil, and the patience needed to wait for apples to ripen on the branches. The forest became her playground, and I watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety as she chased after rabbits and tried to climb the low-hanging branches. Her laughter, pure and unrestrained, was like a balm on the wounds I'd carried for so long, but beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Rachel's betrayal gnawed at me like a persistent ache. How had she managed to keep Lily hidden all this time? What had she been planning? The courtroom battle that followed was a whirlwind of accusations and revelations. Rachel, once a figure from my past I barely thought about, became a tempest of fury and madness, her wild eyes and desperate screams echoing through the sterile halls of justice. The court declared her mentally unstable, but the damage she inflicted was far deeper than any ruling could repair. Lily's presence in our home awakened a dormant love I thought I'd lost forever. I found myself lingering longer in the kitchen, singing lullabies I had forgotten, running warm baths, and brushing her tangled hair until it gleamed like spun gold. I bought her new clothes, soft sweaters in pastel colors, sturdy boots for the muddy woods, and a raincoat with a hood that made her look like a little adventurer ready to face any storm. Sometimes when she fell asleep, I would watch her small chest rise and fall and wonder if she knew how fiercely she was loved. James and I too began to reconnect. The walls we had built between us slowly crumbled brick by brick. We shared quiet dinners, tentative smiles, and the occasional stolen moment of tenderness that felt like a secret rebellion against the pain we'd endured. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was a start. Yet, as the days grew longer and the shadows in the forest deepened, I began to notice odd things, whispers in the wind, the feeling of unseen eyes watching from the trees. One evening as I closed the curtains before bed, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing across the road, shrouded in darkness. When I blinked it was gone. My heart hammered in my chest, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. Was it just my imagination, or was something, still lurking in the corners of our lives, waiting to undo the fragile peace we'd fought so hard to build? The mystery hung over us like a storm cloud ready to break, and I knew that whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt like walking on a thin thread stretched tight between hope and fear. Lily settled into our home with surprising ease for a child who'd been lost in shadows for so long, but I could see the flicker of something unsettled behind her bright eyes, like she was carrying secrets too heavy for her small frame. I tried to fill her world with warmth and safety, but the forest whispered reminders that not all wounds heal with time or love. James threw himself into making the house a home again. He fixed the creaky floorboards, repainted walls in soft cream, and even built a small playhouse in the garden. Watching him wield a hammer with that awkward determination made me smile more times than I cared to admit. It was as if we were both trying to mend not just the house, but ourselves. One afternoon, I found Lily sitting on the porch steps, clutching a worn teddy bear that looked decades old, a relic from a past life she hadn't yet shared. Her delicate fingers traced the faded stitching as she stared into the distance, her lips pressed into a thin line. I sat beside her, careful not to crowd her, and she finally whispered about the nightmares that haunted her sleep, the shadows that chased her through unfamiliar woods, the cold voice that told her she was unwanted. I wanted to hold her, to promise her the world, but my own heart ached with the ghosts of my past. Instead, I told her stories about the forest, the brave foxes, the wise owls, the gentle deer, that protected the village and its people. Slowly, she nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing. If only a little. At night, I lay awake listening to the wind rattling the window panes, wondering how much darkness we could carry before it swallowed us whole. Sometimes I thought about Rachel, the woman who had stolen our daughter and shattered our lives. Her rage, her madness, the way she had tried to rewrite our story with lies and manipulation. The courtroom battle had ended, but the scars remained. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in fiery reds and purples, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the forest, just beyond the garden's fence. James was out chopping wood. Lily was inside, lost in a book. I squinted, heart pounding. The figure was tall and cloaked in shadow, and when our eyes met, a chill ran down my spine. They vanished before I could move, leaving only silence and the rustling trees. I told James, but he brushed it off as a trick of the light or my mind playing games after everything we'd been through. Maybe he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to step out of the shadows. Days blurred into nights filled with restless sleep and whispered fears. Lily began asking questions about her past, about the woman named Rachel, about why she had been taken and hidden away. I answered as gently as I could, careful not to unravel the fragile threads holding us together. But the truth felt like a double-edged sword, necessary yet painful. Then came the letter. No return address, just my name scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. Inside, a single sentence. Some truths are better left buried. I folded the paper slowly, my hands trembling. Who had sent it? Was it a warning? A threat? Or a desperate plea from someone caught in Rachel's tangled web? James found me staring at the letter hours later, and for once I saw the same fear mirrored in his eyes. We weren't safe, not really. Whatever darkness had haunted our past was creeping closer, and we had no choice but to face it head-on. That night, as the house settled into silence and Lily's steady breathing filled the room, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight dance through the trees. Somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, lay the next chapter of our story. A mystery wrapped in pain, hope, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the calm we'd fought so hard to find was only the eye of the storm. The quiet of the village no longer felt like a sanctuary. Instead, it pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating, like the thick fog that rolled over the moors at dawn. Each creak of the house, every rustle beyond the window, became a reminder that we were not alone. The letter's ominous words echoed in my mind. Some truths are better left buried. But I had no intention of burying anything else. Not after everything. Lily, innocent as she was, started to change. Not dramatically, but in small, unsettling ways. A glance over her shoulder when no one was there. A shiver when the wind whispered through the trees. One evening, I found her standing at the edge of the garden, staring into the dark forest as if expecting someone to emerge. Her pink sweater was too light for the chill, and I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the tremor beneath her skin. I told her I was there, that she was safe, but the fear in her eyes was a shadow I couldn't chase away. James tried to keep things normal. He coaxed a smile from me with his awkward jokes about my gardening skills, or lack thereof, and insisted on family dinners, even when my appetite vanished under the weight of worry. His hands, callous from years of work, would sometimes find mine across the table, a silent promise that we were in this together. But I saw the strain in his jaw, the haunted look that flickered in his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. One morning, as the sun spilled gold across the hills, I decided to confront the past. I drove to the nearest town, a sleepy place called Wycliffe, where Rachel had lived before disappearing into the shadows. The old woman who ran the local bakery remembered her. A troubled soul, she said, always whispering to the wind. No one knew where Rachel had gone, but whispers spoke of a cottage deep in the woods, abandoned and overgrown. I felt like I was chasing ghosts, but I had to try. For Lily. For James. For the fragile family we were trying to piece back together. That night, a storm rolled in, fierce and relentless. The wind howled like a beast outside the windows, rattling the panes and sending shadows dancing across the walls. I sat by the fire, Lily asleep in the next room, and James reading quietly beside me. The letter lay on the table, tempting me to open the secrets it held. Suddenly, the power flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The house groaned under the storm's assault, and a cold dread seeped into my bones. I reached for the flashlight, my fingers trembling, and as the beam cut through the blackness I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the garden watching us. Tall, silent, cloaked in shadow. My heart thundered. James was beside me in an instant, his hand finding mine as we stared into the night. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just watched, a silent sentinel in the storm. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the trees, swallowed by the night. We locked every door and window, but sleep was a stranger that night. I lay awake, thoughts swirling like the tempest outside. Who was watching us? What did they want? And most terrifying of all, how much more of our lives were tangled in lies and danger? Morning brought no answers, only a fragile calm and the promise that the mystery was far from over. But as James and I shared a glance, tired but resolute, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever shadows lurked beyond the trees, we would face them together. For Lily, for us, for the family that refused to be broken. And somewhere deep in the forest, hidden from the light of day, secrets waited, dark, dangerous, and waiting to be unearthed. The uneasy calm that settled over our home after that storm was like the deceptive stillness before a wildfire. Mornings began with the pale light creeping through the curtains, but the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, as if they were stretching, waiting. Lily clung to me more tightly these days, her small hands gripping mine like a lifeline, and I felt the weight of her silent fears as keenly as my own. James and I tried to hold onto the threads of normality, me tending to the garden, him fixing the leaky roof and stacking firewood, but beneath the surface tension simmered. We both knew that the figure at the edge of the garden wasn't just a trick of the light or a consequence of our frayed nerves. Someone was watching us, and that someone was patient, biding their time. That I found myself wandering the forest in the early mornings, the mist swirling around my ankles like a ghostly shroud. The trees, once a source of comfort, now loomed like silent sentinels guarding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. I searched for traces, footprints, broken branches, anything that might hint at who was lurking just beyond sight. The forest was vast, but even its breadth felt claustrophobic under the weight of suspicion. One afternoon, returning from my walk, I caught a glimpse of a weathered envelope tucked beneath the garden gate. It wasn't there before. Hands trembling, I picked it up and unfolded the paper inside. The message was chilling in its simplicity. Trust no one. The past is not dead. I showed it to James, whose face darkened with a mix of anger and fear. We spoke in hushed tones, weaving theories and possibilities, but nothing concrete emerged. The envelope was a warning, but from whom? And why now? Lily, ever perceptive, asked questions that cut through the fog of confusion. She wanted to know why people were so angry, why secrets seemed to follow us like shadows. I held her close and promised her safety, even though the promise felt fragile, like a house built on sand. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, I noticed movement at the edge of the forest again. The figure was there, this time closer, just beyond the flickering light of our porch. I stepped outside, heart pounding, and called out softly. The figure didn't answer, didn't move. Then, as if deciding I wasn't ready, they slipped back into the shadows. James joined me, and together we stood in the fading light, the unspoken fear hanging heavy between us. The question that haunted me was no longer if we were being watched, but what was waiting for us in the darkness that night. As Lily slept peacefully for the first time in days, James and I sat by the fireplace, the letter and envelope spread before us. We realized that to protect our daughter and each other, we would have to unravel the tangled web of lies and pain that had ensnared our lives. The forest outside whispered secrets, and I knew the next steps would take us deeper into the unknown, where love, betrayal, and the shadows of the past awaited with bated breath. And somewhere, hidden beneath the canopy of ancient trees, a truth waited, one that would change everything.